Hi Downton fans, my name is Anna Robbins, costume designer for Downton Abbey, A New Era. You're about to watch an interview I did with my co-costume designer Maja Meschede at the Regent Street Cinema. We loved bringing the 1920s to life on screen and can't wait for you to see the film when it's yours to own on digital and Blu-ray.
I would like to start with a question for you, Anna, because you worked you were the costume designer for the 5th and 6th seasons of the TV series and also for the previous film. And the approach to making films as opposed to making TV is very different. How this impact your approach to creating costumes?
Yeah, so it was a real challenge taking it from the series into the film in terms of scale and the fact that you're working where costumes are going to be seen a couple of inches high to being seen a couple of meters high. And when you're working with original pieces that are almost 100 years old, the kind of level of detail that's going to be seen is much higher. So it's like we had to raise the bar and look to just make things feel more cinematic, but also practically museum quality in terms of what we were able to put on screen. So it was challenging across a number of levels, but a great opportunity to sort of showcase the costumes in greater detail.
When creating costumes for a period film, there's much research involved and an aim to achieve historical accuracy. But did you do any kind of adjustment to the costumes to make them more appealing to a 21st century audience?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because Downton is known for its accuracy, its historical accuracy, its sort of sense of the period, and to a certain extent you're almost straitjacketed by that because the expectation of it being accurate is so high. And I've always said this is still a fictitious drama, it's still storytelling, it's still wanting to use costumes to tell stories and help to characterize. And it's more, I think, about the authenticity of the period, so definitely wanting the costumes to feel authentic. And we used a lot of original pieces, which I'm sure we'll talk about in greater detail, but I've always said that it's a bit like looking through a contemporary lens at that period and that you're curating from things that are historically accurate, but you're curating them with a modern eye. So it's covetable and aspirational to a modern audience, and it's a kind of edited version of 1928.
Something very, very important in achieving the dream image that Downton Abbey offers is that it's a certain consistent coherence of all the aesthetics of the film, all the aspects like hair, makeup, set, photography, everything. How do you work? How do you coordinate?
Well, that's actually the beauty about filmmaking, that group of people, as you said, makeup designer, director, production designer, producers and costume designers in this case, that you all get together and have meetings and you do creative brainstorming and you put all your beautiful ideas together and create something amazing and very unique by collaborating very closely. Downton Abbey is very much about the costumes, and I think they're so beautiful, but the costumes wouldn't be so beautiful without beautiful production design and the lighting, and then I think also the music on this film is spectacular, when the film people arrive and there's jazz music. I think it's all just such a wonderful collaboration, right?
Yeah, it becomes like a bigger than the sum of its parts, or something that when it comes together it ends up being, greater than the sum of its parts. And I think quite a large part of that is down to our producer Liz Trubridge, who is the person who puts, all of us together and is sort of creating, she's sort of building the recipe. Like it's a kind of alchemy in a way, I think, as to who you put together, and she kind of oversees the general look of it, and I think is probably responsible for the cohesion. Yeah. Okay,
so would you say that you realize her vision rather than the one of the director? Because there have been many different directors throughout the TV series, through the films.
Yes, and Liz has been on Downton since year dot and has such an understanding of you know, the camera shots and the fact that they're always at a certain distance and little things that you would probably hardly notice, but are the same across all of the different directors that have come and gone. And I think that's what gives it a sense of being, you know, linear and tied together as we've gone along. Let's
talk about colors. How did you approach colors for all the different characters?
I mean, I think we probably started with colour as our initial basis for discussing where we wanted to go. And I think I've always had in mind signature colours for certain characters and looked to kind of create wardrobes and palettes because of that. I mean, sort of taking Lady Mary and Lady Edith as an example, I'm always looking to either complement each other or contrast depending on what we want the scene to do. And Lady Mary might wear slightly more colour blocking, we'd look at more primary colours, and it's like you could take the colour red and on Lady Mary it would be maroon, and on Lady Edith it would be more coral, and on Cora it might be a more dusky pink, and so you can kind of take one colour and give it a slightly different accent for each of the upstairs women, and that creates the palette for them. On this film, I talked with Michelle Dockery about softening Lady Mary and presenting a slightly more vulnerable side to her character, and we did that through colour, so still using a lot of the sort of signature colour blocking and bold primary colours, but also introducing some dusky pinks and some sage greens and softening the textiles and fabrics that we used. And then with Edith, you know, coming in with the prints that feel like a signature for her. It was about continuing a journey that has been started long ago. There's a real shorthand that I have with these characters. And I think what was then amazing was the injection of these really exciting new characters. And Maja had like amazing ideas about the palette that we wanted to introduce for Myrna, which was just a beautiful contrast with the characters that we already know so well.
Yeah, so Myrna, when she first arrives, is in this ice blue coat and, you know, platinum blonde hair, and it was really important for us to have her, you know, look very different to everyone at Downton. Or when the family travels to the south of France, it's again a different color palette, which I think is so beautiful, and warm, summery colors, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And did you take inspiration from any real-life Hollywood diva of the time?
Yes, I mean, we looked at Vivian Leigh, and it was really enjoyable to research you know, these Hollywood stars in the 1920s, you know, Vivian Leigh, Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, and then we will speak about this later. It was also fun to create the 1875 costumes out of a 1920s perspective, you know, but we get onto that later. But yeah,
being a part of the film set in the south of France, what was the approach to address the French characters, but also the English characters out of their comfort zone?
When we first got the script and we were able to see how many different worlds had been created that we were able to explore. So, you know, we know Downton and we understand it, and we've got these sort of dark wooden backdrops, and, you know, the red sofa in the library, and you've got all of these very signature colours that you're working with, a certain palette that works within an English aristocratic house. To then jump into the south of France gave us an opportunity to completely flip the palette and look at these sort of Neapolitan sorbet-like colours set against these kind of much lighter, brighter backdrops, saturated sunlight, and you know, seeing how Julian Fellows had written the script, where it wove between those two locations, gave us a great opportunity to bounce backwards and forwards from that really sort of summery Riviera feel back to Downton and contrast the palette of the costumes, yeah, in the same way.
If usually a part of a film wardrobe is rented or bought and then adapted to the actors that are going to wear them, and another part is normally made especially for the characters, how did it work in this film?
I think it's generally a very organic process, right? And as Anna already said, it's about authenticity. And we did find beautiful 1920s original clothing from America, Italy, France, the UK, and also elements like beautiful lace, which then, we made dresses out of. And
when we found beautiful pieces, that became, I guess, the starting point for a scene, perhaps, where you would know that it was going to be a Myrna or a Lady Mary, and then we would compose the scene, and then it would start to become apparent what we needed to make to complete those ensembles. So I think it would usually start with an original garment or fabric, and we'd work that way.
There's one specific dress for Myrna. She's wearing, it's the kind of aquamarine long evening dress with sequins, and basically we took apart a beautiful old 1920s cocktail dress that was unfortunately already quite shredded, right? And turned it upside down and created something new. And I think it depends on what you want for a specific scene, for a feeling, and depends on what we find, what works. And it's very organic, I think, the progress between finding something original or making something work, and finding a beautiful fabric, but it's not the right color, and we need a beautiful blue. And
and we had an amazing dye room where we were able to basically create anything that we wanted. So we were able to, really think about it as what we were wishing for, and then make that happen. Really, very talented department.
And something really exciting in this film is that there's a film within a film. And how did you approach the overall creation of the costumes for those scenes to enhance the difference between?
Maja should talk about this because she led on it, and it was great. I just wanted to say that the reason it came about was because of us, in that there was always this film within a film, but it was written as the 1920s, and we were talking about it, saying, but this is this incredible opportunity to delve into a completely different world, a different century even, and create something that looks really different. And again, a side to 1920 society that we haven't seen. So coming up with the 1870s gave us this incredible starting point in terms of shape and silhouette and style. And as Maja touched on, the fact that we were doing it through a 1920s lens, so looking at films that were filmed in the 60s but set in the 40s, and the fact that this sort of 60s hair and makeup and styling was seen through the clothing as it was designed, and we wanted to get that kind of mashup of 1920s meets 1870s. And it was, a great opportunity because Myrna inhabits the glamour of the 1920s and then the 1870s.
And it was quite challenging to look at, these 1875 costumes out of a 1920s point of view. It's like, how do you get there? What fabrics do you use? What flowers did they use? And there's this beautiful, it's a play called The Age of Innocence from the 1920s. And it's like, why does it look 20s? What exactly is it? And it took quite a while, and experimenting with fabrics, color, different textures, and especially beautiful old flowers made in the 20s. It took a little while to get there, but then I think it does work really well. And then also scenes of The Gambler, the film are in black and white, and the costumes had to be high contrast at the same time, and it was beautiful. And as Anna said, the jewelry and the hair and makeup really make it then look perfect, right?
And we slightly augmented the proportion of the bustle, because I think our director, Simon, got really nervous that Laura Haddock wouldn't be able to stand or sit or lie on the bed.
For the dinner scene, right?
Sit at the dinner scene
shuffling.
elegantly. So we had to sort of play about and get Laura to try sitting and try lying. And eventually, I think, did we take some of the bum pads out a little bit? And,
we did,
and made it just feel a little bit more contained, which I think helped to make it feel like it was ours and to give it a stamp.
It was less 1875 then as well. It was more an interpretation, and it worked really well, I think.
Okay. You mentioned jewelry. Do you also take care of the jewelry?
Yes, absolutely,
Yes.
yeah.
And how do you work on this? Do you use replicas, originals?
I think the jewelry is so important. I mean, it's kind of finishes off the look beautifully, and I can only speak for Myrna. I mean, what was really important about that, the jewelry that I chose for her was very contrasting, to her look, whereas all the other beautifully elegant ladies from Downton, it really matched the costume and, hand makeup. It just was such a beautiful unity, and it was quite fun to have Myrna then. It was clashing, and it just about doesn't really work, and that was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, great. And we work with an amazing jeweller called Sophie Millard, who has provided jewellery across all of the series and both of the films now. And I think we worked out that we'd hired over 500 pieces of jewellery for the film. It was like a constant stream of beads and diamonds, and it's a really creative process. And I mean, the accessorising is great. I love the millinery and the jewellery and the bag sourcing and the shoemaking. And we were really fortunate to be able to work with Bentley and Skinner as well, who provided us with some incredible originals. Lucy's tiara at her wedding and this beautiful brooch that she wears are eye-wateringly expensive originals, so it was quite a nerve-wracking day on set. And kind of peppered across the film, there's some beautiful pieces. I think Myrna had a few, Mary had a few. The ones that really, really sparkle tended to be the real diamonds.
There are a lot, and I mean a lot, of hats in this film. I was just curious how much were stock, how many were bought in, and did you work with any particular milliners?
Yes, so some of them are original, although they usually tend to be quite small, and then definitely won't work if the actresses are wigged. That tended to mean that we would have to make. I work with an amazing milliner called Sean Barrett, who has made hats for like pretty much every film you've probably seen that's been filmed in the UK. And he's incredible at translating designs and going up into his loft and finding original trims and veils and straws and flowers and things. The vast majority of the principal women are bespoke made hats. And the gents is a kind of combination of new sources, bespoke makes and hires, I'd say.
I think the interesting thing about this film is that for most of the film, the costumes immediately tell you the status in the hierarchy of the people. And for me, the interesting moment is when the staff get recruited as the dinner party guests. And then suddenly the whole thing is turned on its head. And particular moving moments were when the staff look at each other in different status costumes. How did you approach that in terms of what you would do to bring that through?
It was really enjoyable, especially to dress Mrs. Patmore and Mrs. Hughes. I mean, when they just come down the staircase, was just wonderful to watch. And I think, again, I keep using the word organic, but as soon as we started having the costume fittings and you work closely with the actors, it just evolves, and we just had so much fun putting on corsets and let's keep adding flowers and let's make the train even bigger and add some more jewelry. It was fun. It was really a beautiful experience.
And Leslie,
really
who plays
it.
Mrs. Patmore, had always wanted to wear a tiara on Downton, and this was her
she got her tiara,
first
of course.
opportunity to take her little cap off that she has had since day one of series one, and she's never relinquished it, because she just says that it's Mrs. Patmore's, it's her the favourite part of her costume, and she was able to take that off and put this tiara on, so that was like a really lovely moment.
Yeah, we had the tiara before the costume was even ready, so we have the tiara. So it's really wonderful,
Yeah, I was going to ask about the downstairs. It's much clearer with the upstairs characters. How much character you can give them through color, and how do you help an actor when basically it's a uniform and the differences are less visible from period to period when we follow them? And you just mentioned Mrs. Patmore, so is there more?
Yes, and I mean, and that's a journey that started before I even came on board with the series. Creating the character through their uniforms was the main way of doing that, and it's definitely in the choice of fabric and the cut and the detailing. Anna would have a sort of a delicacy to it, often a kind of floral texture within the silk or the wool. Baxter would have little details that would show that she was a competent seamstress herself and could actually, add detail to a uniform that they would make their own clothes with fabric that was provided by the family. Usually their Christmas present would be a bolt of fabric. And then, I think you're right, we've got less civilian wear costumes with which to tell their stories. So you've got to be quite concise with what it is you're trying to say about the character and the colour choice. And again, Mrs. Patmore, she's reworn the same suit year upon year because actually that makes sense of her character. And it was a really practical piece of clothing that wouldn't have changed until she needed to change it. You'd make more advancements in terms of style and cut and shape with the ladies' maids because they were required to dress to a certain level because they were more visible. So it is about creating the hierarchy and looking at the practicalities of how they were able to dress and get colour on them when you can.
Hi. I just wondered, do you have a warehouse full of clothing, or do you hire things in, or do you make them? And also, how much influence do the actual actors have in the clothes they're wearing?
There is a huge warehouse in LA where all of the costumes are stored. So everything that we made on the series and on both films has been kept and is archived. And the amazing part of Downton is that I think the costumes have got a life after the film and are quite often seen again in exhibition spaces. And that's a lovely thing as a costume designer to know that the detail can be seen again. There's a combination of making and sourcing and hiring, and the hires will go back to the hire houses.
Do you get the script and then decide what the person is going to wear? Is that where it begins?
Yes, the script is the starting point, along with the kind of more generic research about the time and any specifics. So I know, for example, we did a huge amount of research into swimwear. We had an entire mood board for Riviera beachwear, and then the scene was just Lucy and Branson.
A lot of work.
Yeah, but yeah, so a lot of research, and then script-specific research where we would break down the requirements of that script, and then we would get the schedule, and the schedule will give us a timeline in terms of prepping chronologically. So when the schedule changes, there's all panic in the workroom as we've got to make things in a different order. But yes, essentially everything starts with the script. And it is collaborative with the actors.
Yes, it is. So, of course, first our ideas of how, what the character should look like, what you want to bring across to the audience, what kind of feeling you want to create. And then it's really important that, once you present these costumes to the actors and you try a few things out, different colors, different shapes, patterns, it's really important that the actors feels really comfortable, feeling like, oh, I'm this character, and it just has to feel right. It has to be, like this unity. And I don't think it's ever possible to just impose a costume, say, this is the color I want, this is the shape, and if you like, you know what I mean? It's really important that it works for the actor and it feels right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a light switch, isn't it? It's like it when it's right and you're in the room and you're working together. It's really clear when you've got a good idea, and then you hit your stride, and so maybe subsequent fittings would be slightly more streamlined because you know where you're going, and they'll trust the process. But yeah, it's a beautiful part of what we do.
Hi, thank you very much for making us enjoy so much the film and everything. When I see all those dresses, they are quite wearable right now. I mean, I will love to dress like this. Do you think you influence the trends right now? Do you see details of with your dresses in the current tendencies?
Yeah, I think that costume and fashion are intertwined, and it's quite cyclical, and they inform each other. So I think, fashion in film has always had a far-reaching impact, and then we end up looking back at fashion, and the whole cycle begins again.
But I'd like to ask to both of you, which is your favorite character to dress and why?
Oh, that's a really difficult one. I mean, I could maybe give you like my top 5, or like my favourite duo or my favourite ensemble. It's an absolute gift to be able to costume Mary and Edith, but that's a really easy answer because you're able to explore such incredible cutting-edge fashions. It's also incredible to design for the Dowager. You know, an incredible character requires, you know, really careful, incredible costumes, and it's been a privilege to work with Maggie. Perhaps on this film, I might even say Lucy, because we were able to, you know, suddenly allow her to blossom and find herself in this new world. In the last film, she was a lady's maid and she had about 5 costumes, and then she lights up in this and has an incredible wardrobe full of some really beautiful pieces. Oh, but then I would also say that we were able to put trousers on our women for the first time. So with Lady Mary, she has these silk pajamas. It felt right that Edith was a liberal career woman with one foot in London, one foot in Brancaster, and that she'd have taken that opportunity to move forward in that way, and that was really exciting for us.
For me, it's also more than one character in one costume. I mean, I love Mrs. Hughes and Mrs. Patmore in their 1875 because it's just so charming, and it was very special. And then I enjoyed immensely dressing Myrna from when she arrives and to, you know, the little black and white film in the cinema in her boudoir was wonderful. And John Bright from Cosprop lent us his archive collection. That was also really special. I mean, what a collection he has. And then also I love Madame Montmirail, and my favorite costume of hers, the one when we arrive at the French Riviera and she walks down the stairs in this very elegant black and white dress. Was also a highlight for me. But yeah, I think there's too much to choose
So many
from.
costumes, it's really
it was
hard.
just a feast.
I was just going to ask, I was lucky to visit Highclere in February, and how much does the furnishings and the colours in the house, which are quite strong, play with what you choose to dress the characters with colour-wise? Because you see them standing out quite strongly against the red sofa or the columns or something. How much does that play? And there's a lot of light and dark in the film. You also want them to sparkle. So how does that come into your mind when you're thinking about where they're going to be sitting, where they're going to be standing?
I mean, all of those things. So, you know, as soon as you have the script, you know which room they're going to be in, you know what colours you're going to be working with. I have to say that the red sofa is the bane of my life because it's a really difficult colour to create harmony. And one of the more complicated things is when you read someone going from one room into another and you're like, oh, well, then I've got to make it work in both spaces. And, you know, with this person and then with that person. So it just becomes more complex. But Highclere, you'll have seen this, it doesn't change hugely from reality into filming. Yeah, it's a strong palette and quite a dark palette, but it gives you great spaces to work with. I always wish that they spent more time in the drawing room, which has got this lovely like duck egg blue wallpaper, silk wall covering, but it's really difficult to film there because of the angles and the mirrors that can't be removed. So we don't spend much time in there, and I've always found that a shame because costumes look great against that palette.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if you've done many period films or series, and if not, how does a costume designer start doing period films? Because obviously you have to have so much specific knowledge, especially the older the period, like you need to know the undergarments, how to put a corset on, all of those things.
I think there are many different ways. Some designers start out at a very early stage and, you know, you just learn by doing, you know, just get thrown into the deep end and you just do it and you do research while you're making the film. I assisted for a long time, so I was watching wonderful costume designers, you know, looking over their shoulders and learning that way. So I think a lot is also just have to go and do it and you know, keep learning. I think I'm still, after 21 years, I'm still learning every day, right? it never stops. So
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting because we've come in, we're both designers but have come from in very different directions. As Maja said, she's worked with some of the great costume designers and learnt from them. I started designing really early and was designing like period shorts where the budget was about 50p and you're trying to work out how to do Victorian costumes on a shoestring. And I've just sort of worked my way up that way. And I've always done contemporary and period, which, and possibly starting off with more contemporary and ending up doing more period. So it's a really difficult question to actually give a definitive answer. I've been very, I've always said yes to opportunity, even if I've not been sure how to achieve it. I've said yes and then I figured it out.
yeah, I think it's about being brave. One of my first really, really low budget student feature films was contemporary, but also set in the 30s, and I had to go to Camden Market and bought 1980s clothing, and at night I was recutting them because, you know, the shape is at least similar to the 30s, and I mean, it's just about being brave, and as Anna said, using every opportunity and be passionate, you know, so yeah.
Firstly, let me say, well done. They were absolutely beautiful, thank you. Where you can't get authentic costumes, how often do you use like man-made fabrics to natural fabrics?
I mean, I don't want to say it, but I don't think there's any man-made fabrics in this. I mean, not knowingly. I think we were pretty disciplined and passionate about making sure it was as authentic as possible. So using natural fibres and constantly trying to find fabrics that behaved in the same way. So it's like velvet, metallic lace, devore, print. It's like they're all the holy grails where you're trying to find things that have the same handle, the same drape, the same weight. I think that's, for me, one of the biggest challenges, to have a completely new costume standing next to an original and for it to feel like they're from the same world.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to the Regent Street Cinema for hosting us. Thank you very much for coming, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.